Hi, everyone. Hi, Andrew. Hi, Nicolas. And hi, Thiago. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us. Today, we have Thiago Ghisi, who is Director of Engineering at Nubank. Welcome, Thiago. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. And I've been following you and seeing all your work on refactoring over the last couple of years. So it's a pleasure to be here in the community.
Thank you so much. I've been following you too. You're pretty active on social media and you share great insights. So it's been a pleasure to have the opportunity to have this chat. And for those of you guys who don't know, Nubank is one of the largest banks in Latin America, but has been founded just 10 years ago. I found just a few days ago preparing for this, but he has more than 6,000 employees already. But other than that, Thiago's had a remarkable career already because he has worked at Apple, American Express, ThoughtWorks, and he also co-hosts a podcast and a YouTube channel called Engineering Advice You Didn't Ask For. So I encourage you to check it out. And also, Twitter account of Thiago is super insightful. He shares a lot of great ideas. So it's great to be able to have this chat. So today, as always, we will have about 45 minutes of conversation around some themes and in particular lessons and insights that Thiago has learned throughout his career. And then we will leave some time for Q&A from any of you that may ask specific questions to Thiago. So let's go. This will be recording and the full recording will be shared in the community as always. So even for those of you who might not be able to join or join in full, you will be able to catch up later. So Thiago, I would start by saying that you're still very young. You have had already an incredible career joining some of the most important tech companies in the world. And I have to say that these times, one of the most requests that I get from readers is about advice about their career in general. Because as of course, this is a time of uncertainty, layoffs, hiring freezes, new disruptive technologies that make our job less secure. So many people look for guidance. And so I would ask you, do you have some advice about how to build a strong career in tech, North Star principles that have worked for you and that you think are relevant?
Yeah, I actually I have a lot of ideas on career, on how to grow, and I gave a talk and wrote like a full-blown article maybe in 2020. Yeah, it was 2020. The talk was 2019 about this exact, pretty much this exact topic. The initial idea that I had was mostly to help people like myself from, let's say, developing countries such as Brazil to get a job
Mm,
abroad. But then as I start to research and as I start to go on my own trajectory, I actually found that it's not only get a job abroad. I think there are people that have successful careers even like working remotely these days, right?
yeah.
But in general, I have some principles and some things that are like I like to share about career. I think the first thing is that when you look at about career progression, right, it's not about having a better title or making a higher salary. I like to think about two dimensions. I think the impact and
Mm,
influence you have. And those things are pretty much proxies to your title and to your
yeah.
salary. They're lagging indicators, right? So you might not be at the right title, but you might be already impacting as a principal engineer, right?
Yeah.
And I used to say a lot that kind of impact comes first and then influence next, right? You first, in order to gain influence, you first have to make some good impact at the place you work, in the community, right? And then the
Yeah.
influence will come along. And I would say that there are times of your career that you're focused more in one than on the other. And the other thing that I say a lot, and that's the framework that I coined in the article, that's called the 4 Ps. That's the 4 pillars that we all need to be looking at to grow in our career in tech, right? And it's like platform, product, process, and people. And even if you like are growing on the technical ladder, right, as a staff principal and so on, you need to be paying attention to those things because those are how you scale, right? And
Yeah.
when I say platform, I'm not saying only platform engineering, right? I'm saying also basic coding skills, like the foundation of like good engineering, right? So then when I say product, I don't say necessarily only the user interface or only the product, but also the business side, right? How the metrics are related, right? And when I say process, I also don't say process on just the bad side of process, just the red tape. I also say process of scaling engineering, scaling good practices, of having a good interview process, as I know you have talked a lot about this. Having an effective hiring process, or onboarding, or on call, or like things that, or even like pull request review process, like, and the process is more like scaling up with some consistency, right? And people, that's the last pillar. That includes mentorship, that includes also, if you have direct reports, to help them to grow, to give opportunity, sponsorship, right? To sponsor people that you help to grow, because that's the way to scale. And that involves also delegation, learning how to delegate, right? Like all those things are on this fourth pillar of people that I put as the last one on the article, but it's actually a more horizontal way, right? So there is a lot there. And I think there are also some other controversial ideas that I have regarding career growth. Like one of them is, I'm a strong believer that if in your first 10 years of your career, you should be changing jobs every 2 to 3 years, because I feel you're going to learn a lot more. Changing jobs and changing stacks as well, right? Like, and I'm a strong believer on the full stack career, right? Like, I feel there is space to grow as a specialist, but I feel, especially in the first 10 years of your career, getting that strong basis, T-shaped, right? The base T, that's how you do it. Is not by staying doing, like using a technology and going super deep in one thing, but to actually forcing yourself to change. And also that's how you grow, like financially too, right? You're going to get a much bigger raise every time you change companies, you change, than by being promoted. And I know this is super controversial. There are, of course, caveats and scenarios that someone was growing with a big startup and their job was changing every 2 3 years, even though they stay in the same company. It's not necessarily changing companies, changing jobs, changing staff. It's like proactively doing that by design. I think that's the core, and not letting the comfort zone stays there, right? Like whenever you're too comfortable with something, things are not uncomfortable, it's time to change. It's like, that's the principle that I have done in my career. It's like, time to change. And that has had a remarkable impact. And I feel the fact that I have a so diverse background, because I was QA, I was like project manager, I work with like process, all those compound, and now I'm a director of engineering. I think I have a much 360 view of how is the day-to-day of different people in my team that I had if I were to pursue just like front-end engineering, or anyway, it's a lot there.
That was a great question. It was a full speech already. I love the approach, and it makes me think about a great quote by a former Formula One driver, who is Mario Andretti, who said, if you feel like you have everything under control, it means that you are not going fast enough. So you have to be slightly uncomfortable and find, that element where you're not too much under pressure, but not too much in comfort. And I also love the bit about how to build, that T shape, right? Because we always talk about you have to have a broad experience, but then become a specialist into something. But there is little advice about how to get there, actually. And it feels to me that you are suggesting that you have to first build the horizontal leg of the T, because it's better, more things early on in your career, so that you can decide for yourself what is that you want to specialize into, because maybe it's a better fit for you, maybe it's more valuable for the state of the industry or whatever. So that's what you're saying.
Yeah, and other thing that I would say is, you need to get real experience on all those different aspects, and nothing better than actually getting a job doing that for a company on that dimension. Because I see a lot of people that try to study on their spare time, right? And try to fill the gaps. Okay, like I'm a front-end engineer, but I'm learning back-end on the side on the weekends. And that's never going to be the same. I feel that like you really, in order to really learn, it's not only reading your videos, right? You actually have, that's why I say it so strongly, you have to change jobs, you have to change stack, you have to change your area of expertise in the first 10 years of your career. You can pursue like a single area after that, but you really need to change and go deep on those dimensions if you want to actually have a strong basis, right? That's why I say is one of the pillars for strong career is to have a more generalist background early in your career and see that is like almost instead of go deep first, you go broad first, right? I'm a strong believer that you need to go broad first and then you can go deep. But if you go deep, like way too early, you're going to be naive about so many things. And I think it's important to be studying, to be reading, to be like, and I'm a big fan of that. Don't take that lightly, but nothing like actually changing jobs and going deep on a problem and having to apply those things and seeing the consequence of your actions.
Yeah.
And the other thing, maybe the final one here is there is a point of diminishing return. Like I say, as a front end, as a back end engineer, as someone that's learning functional programming or someone's learning a new language, usually if you are working with that on the day to day, usually after 2-3 years, you get to a point where you already know like the 20% that matter, right? The Pareto principle.
Yes,
and
exactly.
After that is going to be like another year to evolve another 1%, another year to evolve another 1%. That's why I feel change completely and go to a different stack, different part of the job. It can be data engineering, it can be DevOps, it can be like even going on the product side, like you can even change to other disciplines. I feel getting to that 0 to 80, right?
Yes.
Is so much easier than getting to the 80 to 100. And if you have not explored different areas and if you have not seen enough, you might focus on something that is not exactly where you can have the most impact. And you might be limiting your options. But it is tough, but I feel it's how you grow.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I think it ties nicely with what you said at the beginning about in the answer about how people grow their career. You focus pretty much on impact, on influence. And these are things that after even a short while in your career, they're just loosely correlated to your tech chops, right? There is a ceiling after a while. It's like you said, it brings diminishing returns and people do not really get promoted that much because they're better from a technical standpoint than others, but more because they are able to work on the right things, the things that bring value even. And maybe sometimes people think that this is more for managers, but actually it's the same. Even in a individual contributor track, it's the same. It's about your influence, your impact across different teams. So would that be your suggestion to people who want to grow in engineering? Focus on, I would say, even impact, soft skills, managerial skills, communication skills, even though you're not pursuing a managerial track.
Yes, for sure. And when I say impact and influence is on those 4 big dimensions, right? So it's like, how can you scale your impact and your influence on the platform side, on the product side, on the process? But yeah, man, I would say that is at least the way that I feel people can grow based on my experience and I can be proven wrong. And that is also my own, I'm a little biased here because that's also my own trajectory. And I think the other thing is, I feel that is also how you are able to deliver things end to end independently. That's how you become more autonomous. Because if you're super deep in one thing, but today, like in any company, even in startup, you need to be able to understand even a little bit how things work on other areas of the code base on AWS. So in order for you to actually be able to deliver something end to end, right? And if you don't have that, it's like all the principles of Kanban and having like low it, like you start to have a dependency hell. Like every single thing you want to do, you depend on another person or another squad, right? Or another department in the company. And it's really hard to drive impact when you're just focusing one thing, right?
Yeah.
But Yeah, I think it's like you, and I usually say that you start your career focusing on the first three P's, it's platform and
Yeah,
product, by becoming independent and be able to deliver things and
on your own.
gaining more and more autonomy.
Yeah,
That's your, like maybe in the first 5 years of your career is to learn good engineering practices and to be fluent in language and to be able to like code quickly and to pick up like new features and know new things and know like how to break it down, like how to like what to prioritize, break tasks. And then after maybe 5, 10 years, some people your focus is on the last three P's. It's how to scale,
yeah,
right? How do you now that you learn how to do things effectively and you know the business side, like how to impact the product and you know how to do good engineering, how to do
yeah,
good platforms, then your focus is to teach other people to multiply your
yeah,
skills, your and then it's less on your direct impact, but more on your influence and your indirect impact, right? So that's why you focus on process, like establishing good process as like team topologies, all those things like
yes,
hiring, right? All those things that matter because if you don't have a good hiring process, you have a good onboard, you don't have a good on call, things are gonna you're gonna be limited on your impact because everyone's
yeah,
gonna be overloaded with that. And if you're not good with people, if you're not good at mentoring and influencing people, you're also going to get stuck because even if you have a good process, if you have people that are not growing, like you don't know how to handle conflicts, for example, that's also going to be a blocker for you to be a
yeah,
multiplier. I think that's the transition. Like you start focusing on the core and your IC direct impact, right?
yeah,
Becoming good at that. And then after to scale out, you have to transition to process and people. Of course, you're always going to be technical. You're always going to be doing things, right? And you still should be transitioning even after that, after 10 years, transitioning stack, transitioning companies. Because not it's not only about changing the part of stack or your like your big area of expertise, but it's also changing domain, right? The business domain. Because
yeah.
if you work on a hospital system versus on a tech
Fintech.
startup,
Yeah,
the constraints are completely different. And that you learn how to apply the same technology in a completely different way. You might be using Java for those two contexts,
yeah,
but when you see the code base, when you see the bottlenecks, when you see one needs to be super deep on security, another one is more on needs to be super cheap to escalate on the cloud, right? You're
yeah.
going to end up optimizing completely different ends.
And do you think, I love your take about focusing on the first two pieces at the beginning and then transitioning more on the other two pieces. Do you think this is straight linear in a person's career, or at some point as a manager, you need to, let's say, stay relevant by working or either going back to do more platform or product work, or I don't know. There is a famous
Yeah.
take about charity managers that the ideal career path is a pendulum
Yes.
between manager and individual contributor, but it's not like a very commonly
Yes.
agreed take. I don't see many managers who went back to being ICs, for example. But what's your take on this?
Yeah, I love this actually. I see that as another dimension that goes in parallel, right? I think that the best managers that I had, they went back to the IC or they are really deep doing some IC work, even though they are like growing on the management path. It is something that's more and more common now, but it's still super uncommon to see someone that's, let's say, at the director plus level to actually switch to be a principal engineer. And
Yeah,
I can probably count in my hands the number of people that I know, myself included, that would be able to perform at the same level as a principal engineer, right? Because
yeah,
usually director and principal are at the same level
yes,
on both tracks, right? And if you're gonna do a lateral transfer or like a move of tracks, right? You're gonna need skills that are completely different. And the opposite is also true. Like for a principal engineer to switch to be a director is also not easy, right? So that's
yeah,
why you need to be switching like after 10, 15 years. It's easier to get comfortable and to get like just trying to grow in one career ladder.
yeah,
But the other side, I think like there are people that were just not born to that they already know that they don't like the job as a director or
yeah,
and is it would be like a shame to force everybody to be switching back and forth all the time, right? But I think the best of the best are capable of and change that because they see the value that those like changes bring them. But I think that's also not different than like switching companies and switching domains and switching parts of the stack. I think and different companies also treat the same title differently, right? A principal engineer in one company might be different, the expectations might be different. But I think as a general principle, like this is amazing. I would love to prepare myself to do a transition like that in the next couple of years. And I know a few folks, a few friends that did that, and it is tough at the beginning, but I think you can bring a lot of the expertise you had on the other track to your current
for
track.
sure.
Like,
For sure.
I think it's super, super powerful.
Because we always talk about the benefit of managers being technical. So like the technical side, bringing benefits to the managerial side, but we don't know, almost never talk about the dual argument, right? That if you're a manager, you are able to apply systems thinking or the way to handle things as an IC that brings a ton of value for ICs as well. Yes, that's definitely interesting.
Yeah. I think as a manager, you learn how to navigate on the organization, how to partner up with different teams, how to structure organizations, how to get the work done, where are the... Someone is on mute. No worries.
Muting.
Yeah, I fully feel that doing those transitions and changing yourself to forcing yourself to do different things is more beneficial in the long run. You're always going to learn more changing companies and stay on the same place, right? And even if that learning is learning what you don't like, right? You might change companies and find out completely disaster. I don't like this culture. I don't like this. That's great. It's still a big learning, and you might be compensated on the way. If not skill-wise, money-wise. And times are tough in tech now, but I think for good people, there are always going to be jobs. And I think
I agree.
The market's
I'm sure
always
about
hot.
it. Yeah. And speaking of changing and seeing different things, we have covered and thinking of all the things that you have said already, going broad first, changing jobs often to chase your own growth. Do you have opinions on the different types of companies that you should join maybe earlier or later in your career? Let's say high growth startups versus big tech, because maybe you learn different things in these companies. There are different opinions. I know people who think you should join startup at the beginning. You have more responsibility, you do more, you learn more. And there are others who say it's not true because startups are messy. You don't learn process. You don't learn how to write software properly. It's because it's just a pile of tech debt. So maybe there's not an answer for that, but maybe you have good examples, or maybe you have an opinion on this.
Yeah, I think like early in your career, I think I would prioritize companies where you have a more full stack view of things, right? Where the dev environment, where things are small enough that you can run most things in your machine. But I think the most important thing, I mean, besides if it is small or big company, is you have mentors around. You have people that are there that are like already a few years ahead of you and are like giving you feedback. I think that's probably the most important thing early in your career. I think it would be really bad if you, for someone that's straight out of college, to go straight to a startup and they are the most senior engineer, right? Or the person that's there, they don't have good peers, good mentors, good examples, because then they will do things their own way. They're not going to learn as much as if they join a company that there is like a strong engineering team and there are people there giving feedback and pushing the envelope, right? I think and I also feel, so that's one dimension, probably the most important, like having good mentors on an environment that are like getting feedback. The second one is you also don't want to join a company that has 10 layers of abstraction of what's happening behind the scenes, because I feel that whenever you're going to transition to a different company, you're going to be pretty much starting from zero, right? So if you're not using open source frameworks, or if you're not using what the market is using, if you're using something really specific, really custom made on a big company, and you are like 5 layers of abstractions away from where the code's actually running. You don't have to deal with on calls. I think that's why I say it's important for you to have that full stack product experience. You are the one, like, you understand the frameworks that are using, and you also participate like full cycle, right? It's not only full stack, but it's full cycle. You are from discovery of the problem to development to maintaining that in production to evolving the code that you wrote and seeing the consequences of writing bad code or seeing the impact of trying to scale something. Like, I think that's when you're going to learn the most, especially if you're around good mentors and there is good like platform ideas, right? Like, I think that's the ideal. The problem is when you don't get either or, right? If you don't have mentorship and you're operating on an environment that you're using things custom made and you don't really understand what's going behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer because especially the bit about mentors, it's one of those pieces of advice that works in all environments without considering the size, the scale, the maturity of a company or a product. It's always valid that if you are the smartest person in the room or the most expert person in the room, maybe you are in the wrong room. You should chase different rooms. And I totally agree about also looking for environments where you can really express an impact that is not fueled by ton of bureaucracy and layering. And that's sometimes my concern with some big tech where people join. I get that these are the most desired jobs, but I feel many people get trapped into situations where you have so many custom tools and pipelines, because at those scale, it's like the laws of physics bend and everything has to be custom. And they get to do very small things because everything is very bureaucratic for many good reasons also, but maybe it's not the best thing to do at the earliest of your career. I don't know. It's complicated.
Previous VP of engineering of mine used to say that is the earning phase and the learning phase, right? And it's almost like a pendulum, right? And sometimes you're going to optimize for earning, right? Sometimes you're going to optimize for learning. Not necessarily you're not going to be earning as you're learning, but maybe at the beginning of your career, you should prioritize learning more than earning, right? So you can join a big tech and get like a good salary, sometimes like 20, 30, 50% bigger than the one you're going to get on a startup. But you're not going to be learning as much, right? You're going to be working on a future factory, right? Or you're going to be joining something, a product is already launched, right? And you're basically doing like fine tunings, right? So this versus a startup, you're going to get the full cycle experience. You're going to be responsible for a lot of things. Your life is going to be a lot more stressful, too. And I think you want to be that way. Early in your career, you want to have a kind of stressful work environment, because the learning happens like when you have pressure, when you have a lot of responsibility, and not when necessarily you are like abstracted away and there's so many there's the SRE team that's doing this, there is ops that's doing another thing, there's like the platform that's doing everything you need, and you're more like building Lego blocks and not actually creating new Lego pieces, right? I think you don't want to be just a Lego builder early in your career. And remember the earning versus learning, right? So sometimes at some point you want to transition to the earning phase, and that might be a good time to transition to a big tech, but early on is probably more learning.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm particularly a believer in putting yourself in a position where you can own your full contribution on a product. Like I would say full stack, but it's not just a matter of being full stack. It's a matter of being able to be under control of what you can deliver on a product. And because I also think that the industry and thinking about the direction we are going, AI as well, we are all going in a direction where the single individual is going to have more and more leverage, right? You will be able to do more and more. And so I think that rewards generalists more than specialists in a way, because I think companies will demand people to be able to leverage everything that they can do by themselves, rather than just organizing people each to do some small piece of the puzzle. That's my feeling.
Totally. Yeah. I think that the idea of ownership, you want to have as much ownership as you can, right? You want to be responsible for as many components, as many pieces as you can early in your career, because I think that's what is going to allow you to build your own startup, right? Or to launch your own product, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing that a friend of mine says a lot is you learn the most when you're like close to chaos, right? Like you're gonna learn, like you're never gonna learn as quickly as when you are like with a problem at hand, right? That requires that exactly knowledge, right? And you have some pressure, some chaotic environment. That's when learning happens, right? It's not when you have a lot of time to learn books, to architect things. Like is when things are on fire, pretty much.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. So I briefly mentioned AI. So I have a big question here. Do you think that the recent developments, what will come in the future, we are seeing new things week by week, agents, ChatGPT and whatnot. Do you think these things will change significantly careers in tech? Are you already experimenting with this in your own team? Are you seeing some patterns or foresee some changes?
Yeah, so I'm definitely playing around with ChatGPT and following all the AI news. I think those are great, and those are is a huge improvement, a huge productivity gain. And I feel I was reading an article like yesterday where they were saying that ChatGPT is already like changing the game when it comes to business articles. Like the bar is much higher now that you can count on having a
It
assistant
is.
like ChatGPT to rewrite things, to give you ideas, right? You can write much quicker and much better. You can phrase things like
Yeah.
is like you can like you can offload a lot of your like cognitive power to that for things that in the
Yes.
past would take you to rewrite a piece or to find something. Now is much quicker. And I think
Yeah.
the
It's
other
true.
thing is I feel that the same thing for engineering. I think the bar is getting higher, but it doesn't mean that the programmer is going to be out of job. I think there are limits. I think I was reading a Twitter thread yesterday on was a GPT-5, right?
Yeah.
And there are limits on how much you can train, how much parameters, how many tokens you can put. They're already reaching the diminishing return on
Yeah.
GPT-4, right? So it's
Yes.
maybe that is not the cost of going beyond what we're seeing is going to be so high that we're going to reach another plateau. Maybe we're not seeing that, but I don't see, for example, like ChatGPT being able to handle production code base and actually have the nuances and all the context that
Yeah.
you need to suggest a big thing. And the other thing, I feel like if you look at the back, like the last 50 years, maybe we had like some like big spikes in productivity. Like for example, when the first, like even if you go back to assembly, right? When the first high
Yeah.
level language come, there was like a big, imagine how much
Yeah.
we save by coding in C instead of assembly, right? And then when the first IDEs came, right?
Yeah.
It was a completely different game. And like now you could load all the project, you could navigate on the code base with IDEs, and then the internet came, and then Stack Overflow was another big huge spike because now you can like Google pretty much everything
Yeah.
you have, and you can find answers in like a super quick way. And it was game changer, right? Stack Overflow was game changer like 10 years ago. And now
Yeah.
ChatGPT I think is another big game. And I think is like we had on IDEs, right, to apply all the refactoring methods, right? Extract things, like create gets and setters, like all those basic templates, right? You can like on IDEs today, you can create like iOS project with 2 clicks, right? And you have a
Yeah.
structure and it's like in the past was not that. Like you had to almost always build your own. Then open source came in the middle, right? So you can
Yeah.
like reuse a lot of code. So we already seeing like spikes and the bar is getting higher and higher, right? So the engineer that was like doing things in the pre-internet era would not survive today, right? Because the speed that
Yeah.
they used to code, the way that they used to code, the size of the problems that they used to handle is much smaller than the size of problems we're handling now. So
That's
I
it's
feel
a great take.
yeah, it's a huge gain, and I think everybody's going to rely on assistants like ChatGPT to do things
Yeah.
quicker. But I still see that ChatGPT is already reaching some limits, and for real production code bases, is going to be a challenge. The same way that IDEs have a diminishing return, StackOverflow has a diminishing return.
Yes.
There is something you need to scale that ChatGPT is not going to be able to handle, right? It's going to be good to set up a brand new thing, a brand new microservice, but then once you get to so many nuances to scale, to make trade-offs, the experience is still going to be the one that's going to be innovating, right? But ChatGPT can give a lot of insights, and I think that's all you should use that.
I agree. It's a great take, and I agree especially on the diminishing return side. As a matter of fact, if you try, for example, G3 versus GPT-4, there are many use cases where GPT-3 is perfectly fine, and it's not easy to find the difference with GPT-4. And I think this is just bound to happen. And in fact, I think the most innovation we will probably see in the coming years will shift from trying to scale vertically, right, being more and more powerful to horizontally, right? Maybe we will focus on orchestrating many agents, similar to what has happened to infrastructure in the cloud days, where as long as the more and more powerful processors as long as we could keep up with this, people did not really care about orchestrating thousands of servers. And then we transition to the cattle instead of pets phase, and we will probably get there for AI too. If you think, you made a great example about a single ChatGPT agent, let's say, not being able to handle a full code base. If you make the metaphor of it being a person, it's like you have a super smart person, but as smart as it can be, they cannot handle a full code base alone. So you have to hire many. And so maybe that is the way forward. We will transition to orchestrating agents that work on specific pieces of code. I don't know. Exactly. Yeah, but it's interesting.
And I think you need to find your own hacks, right, on how to leverage the platforms that you have the most, even with their own limitations, right? There are people that are amazing at they have configuration of their IDEs. They do things that they have shortcuts. They leverage the IDE to the extreme, right? That make them to do things so much quicker, right? Because they have shortcuts for everything. They have plugins, right? And I feel that the same is for ChatGPT. They're going to be limited, but it's revolutionary what you can do if you know how to use, how much context it can handle, right? And you apply in small pieces, right? You can, instead of refactoring the whole code base or trying to build a feature from the ground up, you can say, okay, there is this piece that I'm going to delegate to ChatGPT and it's going to do something. The same way that it's almost like the refactoring analogy, right? You don't apply all the refactoring methods, all the refactoring patterns, right, at once. You apply one, okay, extract, you apply another one. And over time, it actually leads to have something much better, right? And I think ChatGPT is the same way. You cannot put the whole code base, solve the problem. You need to give really specific, but you're going to still need someone to delegate the task to the ChatGPT or whatever assistant you have. The same way you need someone to configure IDEs and have that whole structure that they're good at. And today, the IDEs are the same for everybody, but only a fraction of the engineers leverage, let's say, 80% plus of the IDEs features that we have today, right?
It's true. No, it's a great analogy, and I think the future might be more similar than in practical ways than to the past that we may expect. It's true that we had these productivity breakthroughs and gains in the past as well, and I agree. So I think we can take some questions from the audience if there are any. So anybody feels free to either raise their hand or write something about in the chat. I see Nicholas writing here, so I will read here. So thank you for thanking us. So you talked about impact and influencer in this interview. There are different styles of leadership and impact. What do you think about glue work, sponsoring, and indirect impact? I found that they're hard to measure and thus hard to market later on. So let's pick this first. What do you think, Thiago?
Yeah, early on, I would say, I think there is that about glue work, sponsoring, indirect impact early on your career. So that's the big question, right? I think you have to be careful. I think Tony Riley, the author of she has a talk called Being Glue, I believe that's the title. And she talks about this problem, right? You have to be careful early in your career to not be doing the things that you should be doing, on like when you are 15 years on your career. So it's like if you're doing a lot of glue work, a lot of coordination, a lot of helping with documentation, helping with process, like connecting people, I think you're gonna have a big challenge to get promoted at the initial levels, because like by design, most career ladders expect the engineers to grow in a certain way. It's not that those things are not important, sponsoring, lure, but they're a lot more important on the second half of your career, not on the first couple of years. I think at the beginning of your career, you need to be a little bit careful with that, or you need to transition like quickly to a more management position, because that's when the glue work, sponsoring, direct impact is going to be valued the most. If you have an engineer that's doing amazing things by being just the glue, right? By being the person that connects people, being the person that schedule calls, being the person that like solves small things, is good that you're helping the team, but ultimately that's being damaging to your own career. So, but those are such important things for the second half of your career. So it's just, I would say, limit the amount of like glue work, sponsorship, indirect impact you do early in your career.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and also makes me think that so it's not only important to learn things, but also to learn the right things, and that you think they will be actually useful, not just in that company, but in other companies. And I've seen many directors and upper management people spending many years in a company, sadly basically learning, I think, more about how to handle specific executives, specific people desires, and becoming very good at that rather than at doing their job as a whole. And so I think if you're seeing that you are learning more like coping mechanisms about how processes work in your company rather than general things that are easy to apply everywhere, that's a smell, that's a sign that maybe you can move on. As you said at the beginning, like move on, you have learned everything you could learn there. It's not just a matter of the paycheck, even though it doesn't hurt, but you can move to something different.
I think that is the point of diminishing return. That's something that applies to multiple things. One thing is to realize when you reach to a point where you're not learning at a higher speed that you were at the beginning. But there is also the custom versus generic, or specific versus more generic application of what you're doing, right? If you're working on a really specific problem that only apply on that company, on that reality, because they have a custom everything, that's also something you have to be careful. I think it's good experience to have, and you can learn a lot of good engineering and you can make a big impact. But I think that's another variable that you have to be like keep in mind. That's like it's going to be hard to transition if you're working with a super exotic technology,
Yeah.
right, or really exotic language. If you're doing like super custom process to one industry and you're not really more broad, more general, or keeping up with the technologies and what the industry is using,
Yeah.
right? Or if you're not seeing the same kind of challenge that other colleagues that you have, other people that you know, other peers are having, something is off. Maybe you are like years ahead of them, but maybe you're stuck in something that's so custom that either you're gonna die at that company or you're gonna need to relearn and you're getting yourself in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sometimes it's not easy even just to have that kind of awareness, right? Understanding that you're in that kind of place. That's a great take. And Nicolas had another question, but I would first pick one from Petros below, and then we can pick second by Nicolas
Sure.
and then Nagirikin. So Petros has a very specific question, that is how we can implement testing strategies and approaches on a team that has not much knowledge in testing. It's a tough one.
That's a super interesting one. I think
You don't.
I think
No,
same. Yeah, the same can be said about how can you learn good, let's say, reliability or operations
yeah.
excellence if no one on the team has ever done that. I think the answer, I think I have seen companies doing like engineering book clubs, or bringing or like trying to find an expert to be the, what is the name, to be the local expert or to be the champion of that initiative. Like you can try to grow your skills by like reading books, talking to people in the industry, or you can try to bring someone that has done that in the past to the team and is going to be the, I forgot the term, but there's a resident expert on that discipline, and
Resident
the one
experts. Yeah.
the one that's going to be responsible, not responsible, the one's going to help your organization to grow quicker on that, because someone that has seen a lot. And by having everybody going on that path together without having previous experience, you're not going to learn as quickly as you could if you bring someone external. I think in testing is the same way. Like there is a limit of what you can learn from books and from consultants or from the industry, or exchanging idea with peers. I think another thing, there are companies that do like maybe monthly calls, like crossing engineering, right? Like maybe there are two startups that like they don't compete on the same market, but they have a lot of like learnings to share. And there is a group of companies that they have almost like a monthly sync between the engineering teams, and I think they can easily learn from one another, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, either become the resident experts or try to form a team of having that, say, learning community of practice, or bring someone.
Yeah. That's a good answer. Another thing that I may add to this is I don't know whether you're not doing testing, but I don't know whether you're in a situation where people would like to, but they don't know how, or they just don't feel the need because they've never done it. So it's like different stages. You have to, I think, because sometimes you've never done it, you don't feel the need, you think it's okay. Right? And it's very hard to move from that place to a place where you have perfect automated testing. So I would try to build that kind of drive, that kind of awareness. What do you want to achieve? Because you have to be very practical. You want tests because you want to trust your releases, spend less time on manual QA. What's the goal here? Because people have to understand this, and then they build that even intrinsic motivation to learn more, to try things, because otherwise you don't go anywhere. You can throw as much content and mentorship to people you can, but if they don't want to do something to test things, which is one of the things that many engineers don't want to, it will be very hard.
Yeah, I mean, just to comment on that, Luca.
Yeah,
I think that is you need to be able to sell this, right? Like to the business, you need to be able to sell why implementing a test strategy will benefit the company. And two is maybe there are maturity models on testing or on architecture. There are a lot of ways that you can see, okay, where I am today as a company, right? Oh, I'm not doing A, B, and C. So you almost have a build roadmap that the industry has done already, right?
Yeah.
So this is like how you grow that, and you can maybe follow that path before you can crawl before you walk, and walk before you run, and run before you fly. And it's easier to go with a super structured path, right? And then as you learn, okay, now I see I need to double down on this dimension because that's what is impacting us. But you need to learn how to sell, and you maybe can also find good maturity models on the different areas, right? And on testing, there is this amazing article called The Test Mercenaries, from how Google built testing expertise. 1 second, I need to answer the door here.
Yes, please. I didn't know this article. I will check it out for sure. So in the meantime, I'm checking the other questions here. Plenty of questions, so thank you, guys. So I think we're going to pick this one by, I don't know if I say it right, Naki. I hope this is right, more or less. Welcome back. So picking another question, I'm picking this by, I hope I say right, Naki. Okay, Naki is much easier. Thank you for that. So could you please give some tips or hard learned lessons to someone who is early in his engineering manager career? So I think other than the advice that you already had, go broad, maybe change often when you're seeking for your own growth. Maybe something that you have learned specifically early in your career that was a harder learned lesson.
Early in my career as engineering manager, I feel. So one thing that's really hard, and I wish I had known this, is giving feedback, especially as engineering manager, right? As engineering manager, I think one of the things you're going to suffer the most early in your career is how to give feedback, but in a way that you're not hurting the person that you're giving feedback to. You don't want to be just a pass-through. You don't want to be someone that is basically just, let's say, passing what others are saying to you to that person. You want to be someone that's going to filter, digest, and see, what I agree, what I disagree. As a manager, it's important that you're not only a proxy, but you actually process the things before giving to the person.
Yeah, that's fantastic answer. Whenever this comes up very often, whenever we talk with managers, we ask me, what's the most important thing as a manager? What advice would you give? The feedback topic always comes up because there is no such a thing as too much feedback. It's so important. So, Thiago, do you hear us? Do you see us? Because I don't see your video anymore.
Yes, we see. I just got my food delivery and I have to jump on another meeting in 2 minutes. But
okay.
Maybe we can take the last question.
Okay. We can take the last question. So I'm looking through here. I think Nicholas had made a second question above. So he said about charity measures pendulum. Do you believe hybrid roles like in between management and IC do exist?
I don't see much, but I see like more people that are more technical and less technical, different archetypes of engineering manager and different archetypes of staff. So I think they exist, and you can actually find they're more technical engineering manager, they're less technical staff engineers. So I think I recommend you taking a look on the staff engineer archetypes and engineering manager archetypes.
Yes,
you can find like
that.
some ones that are kind of a mix.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's I agree, and I would add that this exists maybe way more in small companies because there is more room for people who have hybrid roles, wear multiple hats. It's easy to find in startups, small scale managers who code more, ICs who accept some managerial duties. But of course, larger the company, I think the more the tracks separate and the harder it is to find engineering managers who spend a lot of time coding. So it depends, I think, on the type of company as well.
100%, Luca.
So thank you, Thiago, so much for this interview, for this event, for being with us. I'm mindful of everybody's time, so we can wrap this up. Thank you, Thiago. Thank you, everyone.
No, thank you, man. Sorry, I'm still here. I just had to grab something at the door, but thank you so much.
No problem. We were scheduled for an hour. It's fantastic. We have all the recording. We'll post it in the community. So see you in the community. We can follow the conversation there. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
See you soon.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Bye-bye.